Kitty, what are you doing? Get up here. Come on. Come on. Get up here. Come on. At some point, I'll see. Kitty matches the lighting scheme. Would you like to say something, Kitty? Oh, how I abuse him. Okay, welcome everybody to the MOSAS podcast. The musicians of the San Antonio Symphony is what that acronym is. I'm your host, Steve Peterson. I'm the principal trombone with the San Antonio Symphony and handling everything media during the strike. We are currently on day 25 of our strike against symphony management due to unfair labor practices. To give you an idea of where we were and where we are now, our salary previously was around $36,000 a year, with some overscale offered, of course, to principal players, the first players of each section, which is a very standard setup in most orchestras. In fact, every orchestra that I've ever played in, generally, you're going to get a little bit more money to be the leader of each section. The offer on the table that management most recently has offered separates the orchestra into two separate groups. One group would be the core musicians, which is about 42 they're proposing, would make $24,000 a year and receive health care. The other group, comprised of 26 musicians, would make $11,250 and receive no health care whatsoever. So this would be the per service group. So we could call this the A contracts and the B contracts. Previously, by the way, we have had, and we do have 72 musicians. You'll notice that these new numbers only add up to 68, which means in this new contract, we're eliminating 4 positions. So that will just disappear into the ether. So this touches on an interesting subject that this structure does exist, A-B orchestras, meaning orchestras where you have some people being compensated more that are the core musicians, and some musicians that are coming in at a per service rate. So just getting paid per service, a service being a concert or rehearsal. So I talked today to our Contra Bassoonist, newly auditioned and a new arrival to the symphony, Marty Gordon, who joined the orchestra right before COVID. And so he barely got to play really anything. COVID hit. And then this really bad deal happened, and now we're not playing because of a strike. So I think Marty got to play maybe one concert. And he was coming from the Richmond Symphony, which also does have an A-B structure. Now, we talked about sort of how these A-B structures can happen as a result of an evolution of the orchestra, meaning you can have an orchestra that is all per service, meaning everybody in the group is making, the same rate per service. So if you're going to a concert or rehearsal, you're getting paid $100, $150, whatever the per service is. And then perhaps management decides, we want to create core players, like perhaps the principal players, to make more money, and then everyone else will make that per service rate. So you can think of the A-B structure as possibly an evolution of an orchestra, right? And then as things progress, generally you start to add more core players, more people making the better money, the A contract money, and starting to phase out the B contracts. You're starting to see this with Fort Worth's orchestra that has started to almost completely phase out their B contracts. Actually, they have a different lettering system, but essentially we'll just call it A contracts and B contracts. So I talked with Marty about this, about him coming from the Richmond Symphony, and how that structure was in play. And then eventually the goal is to make it to a salaried full-time orchestra. So I would say any of the larger groups that exist, any of your bigger cities like San Francisco, Detroit, Chicago, New York, on down the list, and San Antonio, are all a full-time orchestra, salaried full-time orchestra. The distinction with San Antonio is that we work a lot less weeks. There's a lot less weeks in the schedule. Pre-COVID, I believe we were at 31 weeks. So that is the difference between, you could have a 52-week orchestra that has a little bit of vacation, or perhaps 45-week contract. So if you're making a decent salary but you have more weeks in the schedule, that's a way to, beef up essentially what you're going to make in a year. So just to be clear, the offer that management has on the table for us right now is de-evolving the orchestra from a full-time position where we could expand from this structure. From the 31 weeks, we could expand from that. When you change an orchestra to an A-B structure, it becomes very, very difficult to shake yourself out of that position. It would be very, very difficult to do that. So that's what we're dealing with right now. So we have an event coming up this Friday, October 22nd. It's a picketing event where we're kind of holding signs and, trying to rally some public support. So feel free to come out and join us there. This is, if I didn't say the time, 4:30 to 6:30. We've got it posted on MOSAS.org and all of our social media channels. And you can show up to 115 Auditorium Circle. These are the symphony offices right next to the Tobin Center. And we're going to be meeting and hopefully, raising awareness about our cause. So come join us there. And okay, now let's join my conversation with Marty. But there are reasons why ABs probably exists. And we were talking about on the phone and how it could be the evolution of a group when you have a group that's entirely per service and then they increase the budget and they say, okay, now we can afford some salaried players. So
sure.
Do you think it's common in these situations, okay, let's make all the first players core, the core players, so they have the better contracts, and then you kind of fill in a lot of the other positions in these groups. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were really the one that kind of, illuminated this for me, that is a kind of, it's kind of like it's an intermediate position, I feel like, as far as
structurally, yeah, I would say that it's by its own definition and function, it's an intermediate position to be in.
As in it. Once they get more money, they say, okay, let's make these core players.
Right. It should be, in my opinion, it should be an aspiration to, if you're a core orchestra, it should be an aspiration to add positions as expeditiously as you can. There are a lot of core orchestras out there that do, in fact, the musicians bargain for additions to the core. So the goal is to it's not a goal of a full orchestra to go to a core orchestra. It's the other way around. So it's a step backward, and in this particular case, it's a fairly large one.
So in Richmond, how long had that A contract and B contract structure been in place, or approximately? The whole time you had been there, right?
Well, the orchestra was founded in 1957, I believe. And it started out as a community orchestra where nobody was it was a volunteer group. And over time, the orchestra leaders and community leaders wanted to bump it up. So they started to add, and it was much like that. They would add like principal players, and then, over time they would add section players. And at some point it got to like 36 was the core. And I think now, I could be wrong, but I believe it's 39. And I think there's a pretty equal amount of per service players. But I know from being in that orchestra that it was a goal of the players to try to increase the core as much as possible whenever. So yeah.
Do you think that will increase? And what was sort of management's? Obviously you can't speak for them, but What were some of the things that you learned over time as you renegotiated those contracts every 2 or 3 years, something like that?
Generally speaking, I mean, I think the longest contract in my time there was 4, but most of them were 2 and 3s. Mm-hmm. And as far as management goes, I mean, if I were going to make a blanket statement, it's that management doesn't like to take on extra expenses. And it's the musicians try to appeal to their sense of this is artistic growth, and these are the things we want to do to to solidify ourselves and to gain reputation, to gain stability within the group, because it's better to have the same people playing together all the time, which is one of the drawbacks of an AB orchestra, because it's like on paper, it looks like, okay, so you've got you've got the A contract players up here and you've got the B contract players back here. But that's not generally functionally how it goes, because a lot of times the service players can't live in the city that they play in, that they play in the orchestra here. In Richmond, a lot of the service players live in DC, sometimes even Baltimore. So they were turning down a lot of the work. So functionally speaking, you're dealing with, the A contract players minus a few people who take off. Some of the B contract players and a lot of substitutes. So there's a lot of flux. Mm-hmm. And and sometimes it's a good result, and other times it can be less than ideal. But
so was the bassoon section always? I mean, you had a similar section, or did you have a lot of subs coming in?
For Contra, we had a lot of subs. Because in that particular section there were 2. First and second bassoon were A or in the corps, and the Contra bassoon was a B contract and had a very small service guarantee. So there were times where we were having to hire a lot of subs. Just depending on what was going on at the time. So
to be clear, the reason that San Antonio looked attractive was the full-time structure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the amount of weeks and the salary is less than some orchestras.
Sure.
But, I mean, it is a full-time group. And I think that distinction is really important, because where San Antonio was pre-COVID was kind of, to me, and kind of what it's maintained over time, was, to me, had a lot of potential energy. It was kind of a jumping off point. From that structure, you could increase the amount of weeks and increase the salary if you were able to increase fundraising,
right,
in general. Hmm? So when you start to downgrade, I would say, to these structures, and it's essentially what you're saying, but I'm just saying it again, you were kind of bifurcating the whole orchestra into these two. Like, some of them are out of town. Obviously half of them are making a lot less money.
Sure.
Which is exactly what we kind of illustrated in this, this proposal. So it's just less money for everyone across the board as well.
Yeah.
Even the core players. So it's just unfortunate, because like you said, it's a step backwards. Once we go down this road and people say, well, if you wanted to play devil's advocate, okay, well, let's just, I don't know if there's any support for this offer, people saying, oh, well, let's just accept it and we'll figure it out, we'll have the symphony play. But it seems like it's shooting yourself in the foot as far as growth of an orchestra, getting it to that place, if the goal is to get more weeks and more salary and a really vibrant organization that has an endowment, which is the savings of an orchestra, which we have never had a very sizable endowment in San Antonio.
No, that's something that has to be addressed. And it takes, I mean, I'll put it to you this way: it takes a lot less time to come up with a realistic plan and a team together to to minimize damage and get yourself in a good position quickly than it is to like really make these kind of cuts and get them back. Those gains will be much slower than anyone will hope for or tell you that they'll be.
Right. And I just listening to some of, the comments that the management staff has made in press and just in meetings and everything, I would, I won't put, essentially we could look up the exact phrasing, but I think the long and short of it is that it's let's live within our means, right? That there is a ceiling of fundraising that can possibly be. I imagine that the reason that this offer was made is that management realized, oh well, we did a study or a projection of what we plan to fundraise over the course of this year. It is only a certain amount. And this is now the offer that we can give you that, is congruent with that. Now, the thing that's so strange about that is how would you know exactly what the ceiling is for fundraising? And you're obviously making a model. Well, we pulled in this amount of money over this amount of time, so we project that it's going to be this amount if we could go. How about though you take in more money, you find a way to really beef up your development staff, and which is essentially who is responsible for writing grants and making relationships in the community with businesses and private donors. And that's what I think that what we've really failed to see here is that, we have a lot of support for the symphony. I mean, there's so much love that I've noticed on social media and, anybody I talk to. It's just a matter of, going out and finding, enough money to support a group. And it seems like we haven't done that.
No, I mean, and what's always a red flag for me, like when it comes to every management is different, every board is different, and there's always sort of a prevailing mindset. And one mindset that sort of again serves as a red flag for me is the belief that there's an absolute hard set, cannot go over, finite number for how much you can raise for the orchestra. And we just happen to hit that number, we hit the nail on the head every single year. I mean, that to me is that's not necessarily the most conducive mindset to success.
Right. Like where is room for growth?
Well, where is room for improvement and room for growth? Because we deal with this as players. I mean, growth and improvement are intertwined.
That's such a great point. I mean, the fact that as a musician, and we can go into this. I mean, the whole reason we got into this is because there is a certain amount of enjoyment at sitting in a practice room alone and making certain, musical passages better, or just enjoying the sound of your instruments. People ask me, like, why do I play trombone? You can see it right over here. My set piece. The answer is I love having something that I can relate to when you watch like the Olympics or like competitive sports. And of course, you can't really compare a lot of activities, but for me, I always felt lucky that like, oh, my thing is, trombone. This is the thing that I can really improve on and, continue with, and how competitive it is to take an audition for these groups, especially full-time groups. Mm-hmm. that was the San Antonio Symphony, hopefully will be. And just as you said, that attitude can be, adopted by management as far as development. How can we be better about fundraising? How can we improve? It's simply maintaining a level is good to a certain extent. Maybe they could say, oh, well, the pressures and the challenges that we face, just maintaining is truly a wonderful thing. Okay, yes, but how about actually, improving? Like I hope that I'm a better player than I am, now than I was, a year ago or 5 years ago, sure. Especially when I first got here. And the same thing, any person doing any job. Yes, we've had, people turn over in management as well, people coming in for a few years.
Right.
But over those, goals need to be set for those years. And, if they identify there are certain challenges in this, if they want to say there's excuses why they haven't done certain things, let's all band together. That's what I really hope to see in a situation like this where they feel like they're in trouble, that we could all band together, the musicians, the management, and figure this out together. That's really what I wanted, a positive message for this. Like, let's figure this out together. We can, figure out how to make relationships in the community and to show that we're of value. And so that's the fact that they've kind of slashed, obviously it's not just, this happens to many groups and not just in music and in numerous organizations. It's a similar thing. Let's live within our means, which is, to me, a very narrow-minded. Yes, it is important to live within your means if you have a ceiling of of money coming in. And there's no possible way you can imagine making more. But that's sort of the problem here, that you can always, if it's like our finances, for example, right?
Right.
So we're not getting a symphony check. What we're doing is we're freelancing. We're taking gigs. We're doing things that we were already doing previously, but more of it. For me, I do a lot of video work. I do, I teach trombone. I'm doing a lot of gigs, varied types of performances. So that's to say that, during COVID, I was, doing a lot of video editing, like so much that I was actually making a lot more than I made in the symphony. Because it was just a ton of work coming my way. So that was a good thing, a silver lining. But that is to say, my whole point with this is that if you feel like you have a limited means, you can always exceed that. And I don't know if it takes creativity, hiring the right people. That's really up to them to figure out. But I feel like the musicians are certainly here as a resource to help with that. I think that's a good message to get out there.
Well, yeah, and as a matter of fact, I mean, our negotiating committee and orchestra committee chair, Mary Ellen Gorey, also our principal second violinist, has said over and over again that they've gone to management here and said, let's do something and we'll help you. Like, tell us what we can do. And they're just like, nope. So, I mean, that's not a great springboard.
Yeah, that was leading up to the last offer that they put on the table, where Marianne had said,
right,
what can we do to help with this? I think she may have directly asked, what are you doing to go out and fundraise? And it seemed like they were not forthcoming with that information, if there is anything happening. Mm-hmm. It's been advertised that, or put out on social in many places, that they have raised, less than $100,000 this season from corporations, right? And it might be more than that now.
Well, their projections for the entire year is $90,000. It's not that they've just raised $90,000 so far. Like, this is where they think they will be at, come June 30th, 22.
Yeah, and again, the next few podcasts we're going to have really exact numbers. This is something that I have some of them here, but I would estimate that our operating budget, just from many conversations pre-COVID, was around, was it $6 million or $8 million? It was $8 million.
I believe it was $8 million. Yeah.
So, and then they're kind of thinking, oh, it can't be possibly more than, what does this even add up to? We're gonna have to figure that out this last.
Well, the budget that they're the budget that's behind the proposal that they're imposing on us, and I'll get into imposing in a second, but I'm going to start with it's a $5 million budget, and this is dollar for dollar a lower budget than they've put out there in a long time. The
budgets, there's a big disparity as far as where we think we need to be. I mean, we really need to be at least 8 million and then more. Yeah. Correct. So, and if we want to grow our endowment as well, then that has to be additional fundraising that they've, from conversations with people over time, they're saying that how can we have an endowment when we can't even pay our bills for the season, right? And just like you said, the red flag of, we just barely make it every single year, right? Just, and not to, air out all the dirty laundry of the organization, but let me just be clear. I love playing in this orchestra. I actually love being here. It's so as far as playing wise and camaraderie, and it's been an amazing experience. But the problem is if your orchestra, if you know that it's only barely making its budget every season, you have to kind of wonder how secure is this position, right? And we're kind of seeing that now.
Sure, absolutely. And this is my third gig that I was in for a length of time, and this is very, very small. This is very understaffed.
What was Richmond at as far as numbers? Do you know? Is approximately? And by the way, can I just add a disclaimer? My if any of our numbers are approximate, I'm hoping that we are not legally held. But I'm going to make sure we have exact numbers in the next few podcasts.
Yeah, they're gonna put me next to the guy that cut the tag off of his couch. So
wait, what?
Well, if you look on the tag on the couch, it's like, if you rip this tag off, you've committed a felony.
What are you in for?
So somebody with a bad lawyer is doing hard time for that.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Yes, of course, being informed and all these numbers, but essentially we're giving approximate. As far as staff, it was around 10, maybe a little less.
Yeah.
For Richmond, you're thinking it was.
It was somewhere in the 20s, the mid 20s.
Okay. Yeah. So, these things have been brought up, in conversations with other musicians that we had so little staff. How do we function on such a skeleton crew? Mm-hmm. And I mean, a lot of the answer is that they work really, really hard, and we really do need to invest, I mean, when I'm saying we, these are directives and things that seem logical to me, that seem logical to anyone. So I'm not trying to say we need to do this, but it seems if you're trying to run an organization, you need sufficient staff to handle, whatever you're doing. It seems kind of.
Sure.
I don't know that anyone would disagree with that. And of course they would say, well, we only have so much money, so we can't invest in staff right now. We just can't do it. Well,
I don't
let's find
I don't understand that either. It's like, well, this is a really difficult problem, so let's set ourselves up to never solve it. I mean, that doesn't that doesn't make any sense to me either.
I feel like we both have kind of a positive outlook on where we could be.
Yep.
And I mean, it's not to say that there haven't been some, amazing, achievements in the past with the symphony as far as, fundraising when they needed it. But it's a matter of that you just have to keep getting better. Just like you said, like a musician does, you have to continue to grow the organization. Of course, the fact that there's a lot of turnover is odd. So that maybe the fact that the teams keep changing,
right?
The CEO keeps changing. The board will turn over, to different people. So
you could look at that as a symptom as well of that. I mean, high turnover generally indicates some kind of instability.
Right. Like, who is the savior that will have the wisdom? Who can come from on high and solve all of our problems? It's odd that. I mean, what is to be done with that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that and I've seen this go both ways, and it really helps when the people in charge, the leadership, really believes in what they're doing, and it's hard for me to sort of keep it above the water on this, but I mean, this contract that we're being offered is just the kind of thing that, this isn't just, we don't like you, we want you to make less money because we think you'll work for it. This is, we don't believe in this, and we're just going to plug as many holes into this sinking boat as possible. And I think that mindset can be as, pernicious and destructive as any external force.
I mean, I've been trying to, and this is maybe rather unnecessary to frame this a certain way. You have, essentially the facts that the offer was made, and you can imply whatever you think they were thinking that way. But I do like what you said is, if there's no belief in the group and sort of in a common kind of idea that everyone can share of growth and making it better over time. So let's make the conditions better. And in this case, it's not that I'm sure they don't, I'm sure they have challenges.
Sure.
But we keep coming back to the same thing. And this is the pitfall that a lot of managements make. They project a certain amount. The only thing they can imagine to do then is to cut things, right? And has there ever been an example of where that's worked, where that actually helped?
Well, that's the problem, is that it doesn't. I mean, and certainly a lot of times the way it's sold is that, if we just make these cuts, then we can grow. Like it's pruning crepe myrtle or something. And
I need to buy some of those for my house.
Okay, yeah. So anyway,
ruining your train of thought.
No, it's okay. I think I got this one.
Keep it. Okay.
I think my synapses can hold on. So
cutting is bad. Yes.
Well, but the thing is, it never grows back. It does, and maybe it stays stagnant for a while, but a lot of times they end up fighting the same battles on a smaller field. And don't assume that they're not going to run deficits on a $5 million budget because it's a $5 million orchestra now. So, that's another problem, is what can you're now actively selling a cheaper product.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. I mean, that's essentially what larger orchestras are dealing with when they go on strike. And this is, they're at generally very good salaries, but they want to maintain those salaries, and I don't blame them. I mean, when you're at a certain level, just like we were saying, when you're at a certain level, you want to improve. Yeah. Right. So maintaining, yes, is good, especially if it's a very high salary. In this case, it's not going to be difficult to sell this because that we need to maintain a certain level, because it was already quite low. The base salary that we had was, okay, I'm going to use another number. I believe it was $36,000 was the base salary, right?
Right. Well, and to that, and I think this is where I was going way before with the budget, is that the fact of the matter is like $35,000 or $36,000 is not a lot of money. I mean, I remember early in my career, my first gig was in '99, and I remember that the idea was like, we want to keep our salaries, like first year teacher. Like that was sort of the benchmark. It's like, you don't want to make musicians to make less than like a first year teacher. And that's completely blown out of the water here. Because in San Antonio, I believe the average starting salary is like 55 or something. It's somewhere in that neighborhood.
Sure. And to put this in perspective, I still felt lucky that I was able to make that salary, and win that job, and I, from beginning to end, I felt lucky to be making that.
Sure.
I was making principal base, so slightly more than that base, right? And so I because knowing that I've freelanced a lot, and you can do very well doing freelancing as well.
Yeah.
But I felt really lucky to be making that money. However, when you are at that level, as far as pay, it will attract, a fair amount of people to the auditions, right? Because they say, okay, this is a full-time group. I can sustain myself as a single person, generally younger, just out of school, or maybe freelancing for a few years. For me, it was, freelancing for a few years. Mm-hmm. You can sustain yourself, and the idea is, okay, am I going to have to come up with other side hustles here to supplement this? And so I've heard some theories that people in town thought that that's what was ideal. Oh, we do this and because we like to do other things. Okay, well, yes, there are other things that you can do to supplement. You can teach. You can, many people in the orchestra have other side businesses. I do, a fair amount of video.
Right.
But the thing that is in your head is that, well, I'd like to audition for a group that makes, more money. So essentially, if San Antonio is able to grow, and I think that San Antonio is an amazing musical product, and I feel lucky to be here again. To be making that money, I felt lucky. However, my feelers are always out for, okay, what is available out there for me to audition that, where I can also feel lucky playing somewhere else, so that I can feel like there's a future, to my finances in my life.
Right.
I
mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be paid well for your work.
No.
I mean, there
No.
and
there's nothing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong. I guess I was trying to put in perspective that I felt lucky to be making what I was making.
No,
I don't want to feel like I'm griping, because I feel so, if I can reiterate, but yes, as you say, putting it in perspective, if the group can sustain more weeks and more salary, everyone would love that.
Well,
any
sure.
group would love that.
Sure.
Right? And adding more weeks to the schedule means, maybe you would think twice about doing other side jobs. Maybe you could supplement with other things, and again, you're going to attract and keep. This is the big thing. Here, it seems like there's a lot of great talent that is attracted here. Or was, right? Leading up when we actually had, you were the last, we were saying before the podcast, you were the last person to audition into the group I was on.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so, and I was on the panel, and we were lucky to have you. So, but keeping the talent, right, is the problem. Because when people see these other groups that they know also play well, but are making, it's just kind of a no-brainer. Like, I had these wonderful hosts when I first came to town, because I had the kind of a halftime appointment. I had what was, there was a no hire for the initially for the principal job, and I was in the finals, and I came in on second trombone for half a season because they needed to kind of fill that position until they re-audition. All right. So I'm staying with this family, and I was talking about auditioning other places, and they're like, well, why would you audition other places? You have a wonderful, this might have even been once I had already had the job outright. I'm like, well,
see, here's the thing.
Here's the thing. I love it here. However, you want to be adequately paid. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be adequately paid for,
And, context. I mean, the reason I brought that up was we were doing some informational leafleting. So what we've done for a lot of the performances at the Tobin Center is that we go out there and we pass out leaflets, which is information about the strike, information about the situation, and it's in a leaflet. So we pass them out to people, and if they have questions, we answer them. So one person, I tried to hand the leaflet, and she's like, well, I'm a musician and I don't get paid, so, and I was just thinking to myself, like, what's wrong with wanting to be paid to play music? I mean, it's a no-brainer to us musicians, but I think it's something that we have to sort of reiterate. Like, this is work. Like, playing in an orchestra is work. I mean, it's hard to get the job, and a lot of your parts in orchestra are challenging in one way or the other. And, there's a lot of precision that's required to make it sound really good. And, and that could be painstaking. I mean, it really can. I mean, a lot of times I'll see people after rehearsals, they'll play through things together. After the clock has stopped, you'll see people try to tune things, try to play things, or talk about things. And, we take this really seriously. I mean, musicians in this business take what they do very seriously, and and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be paid for your passionate work.
No, I mean, I agree with everything you said. Of course, all the terms are kind of relative. What is serious, right? In this case, it means that you want to do a really great job.
Yes.
That you are spending a fair amount of practice time to make sure, and that what you're playing on stage is a good product for the audience, but also for yourself. But you touched on an interesting thing about why this idea that, if you enjoy it, then you don't need to get paid. You should just do it for the enjoyment. And of course, people do this. You're doing, a lot of people are playing music for fun. I've done a lot of music for fun, things that I have not been compensated for. If I did a duet with you, and we were talking about doing that maybe for the podcast, right? I would enjoy that, right?
Sure,
I would hope. So, but if we found an outlet, to get paid for that, of course we're going to do that. But I think what it comes down to is if you're going to devote a lot of your time to play at a high level, you need to have money.
Right. You need right.
If you're going to devote most of your time to this craft, you're going to need money to live.
Right.
Yes, and not just hopefully to have things that people have.
A practice room is usually located in some sort of building that you have to come up with the money to pay for.
I mean, one could argue that if you do things at a very, very high level, much like an athlete, a surgeon, that you should be adequately compensated.
Sure.
And to the point where, have you ever had people come up to you and say, "Oh, I have no idea how you do what you do"? And of course, it seems strange because, you sit down and you practice for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And you do this, and maybe it takes a handful of talent, right? So for this awe-inspiring product that and I'm still in awe of the whole thing myself. I mean, the reason we got into this thing was because we were at some point awe-inspired by something. Maybe a lot of people forget that that's how it happened. And when you say it's a job, it can be a job. But for me, I know you're trying to frame it as like this, we need adequate pay, and I totally agree with you. The way I'm trying to frame it is that I love it. And yet I also want to get paid adequately.
Well, and again, there's nothing, wrong with that. I mean, but it really just comes down to I don't see, I mean, you have an orchestra, and obviously, ideally, it should be in the leadership's interest that the orchestra functions and plays as well as possible. And obviously, the more time they can devote to working on their orchestra music as opposed to practicing music for a gig or teaching 1,000 students or whatever. Obviously, the more time you can devote to your duties in the job, the better you're going to do. And it should be in the board's interest to nurture that, as opposed to force people into throwing more irons in the fire and not being able to devote as much time and energy in the job. So, I mean, and you would think that would be something that would be a mutual agreement. You think that would be one thing that the musicians and management can agree on, is that, this should sound as good as possible, and what everybody does, that should be a shared vision. That shouldn't be a this versus that. But unfortunately, it often does, it turns into that by sort of a passive, in a more passive way. It's like, well, what if we cut this and what if we do that? Which will, impinge on those things. But it's never, management never says we want the orchestra to sound worse. They don't want that, but they're willing to do things that will result in that.
It's so well said. I mean, that's what I said earlier about that this orchestra had nothing but potential energy as far as where it could go, as far as adding weeks and adding salary. And it still was in a place, I think, where they could do that structurally. This new contract, there's no room for that, obviously. It would be so difficult to get out of this structure. Some people making this amount, some people making this amount, and much, much less for everybody across the board.
Right, and the much less across the board creates another issue. Now, before this all went down and people were making 30-something thousand, the way they made this work, so they could afford, things like food, housing, that stuff, is that they did things on the side. Even before, $35,000 is not enough to really... it's
sustain.
Yeah, I mean, you can live within your means maybe, but that's very difficult to do. And obviously, the way people made this work before is that they had things on the side to make extra income. They would teach a few students, they would play a freelance gig during a dark week. And for the audience, a dark week is when you have, let's say you have a season calendar. And there's weeks in the season where it's okay, nothing is happening these weeks, and you don't get paid for that week. That's a dark week, as opposed to a vacation week where it's you have the week off and we're paying you. So, just as a matter of
Yeah,
distinction.
I think we mentioned earlier. Who knows if I'll cut it out early?
Who knows what you'll cut out?
I'm going to try to keep this all the way through, but if I sound stupid, I'll edit myself. I'll be doing a lot of cutting.
Well, on my sake, yeah, you're going to be. You got your get your scissors out.
No, I'm leaving most of it. You sound great.
Wonderful.
No, I think we've covered. A lot of how, because I think, as I said earlier, a lot of people go to the symphony, they have no idea how it's structured. They don't know. These are just people that like to play on the weekends, that do it they have no idea. A lot of people. Right. So, a lot of what is happening here is that perhaps people are learning how it works, what it takes to get there, the fact that, people go to school, they get bachelor's and master's degrees, doctorate degrees even. So just to bring it back to San Antonio, hopefully we can figure out a way to work together to, preserve a competitive rate, for the quality of orchestra that we have here. So, wherever that is, wherever that lands, hopefully it's on the high side, right?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, it's, but I think what I think a lot of this boils down to is, I've been to a lot of things where you get a consultant to come in and they talk about things like shared vision. And I mean, I do think it's important, not necessarily in the sort of consulty way that they come in and talk about it. But I mean, I think the shared vision should be the mission of the organization. I mean, if that's the mission statement, then absolutely. And I think, the mission statement should be clear and it should be something you really should be a no-brainer.
I don't think that there's ever been a shared mission that was made clear since I've been, as in maybe they had, it sounds like Stephen R. Covey's stuff, 7 Habits of the Highly Effective. You have your mission statement, you have everything, leading you towards achieving that mission statement, right?
Right.
And I'm sure I've been into the office where I saw goals for marketing and things like that, things they had to do. But as far as getting together, man, that would be amazing. You could see it as like corporate fluff where they get people together. Here's our mission. But if it was truly legitimate, if it was done from a place of honesty and solidarity, of course, a word that we're using a lot now, mm-hmm. Where they would say, okay, we're going to work together to achieve this high level of performing and high level of fundraising and engagement with the community and any number of facets in why an orchestra is valuable, to say nothing of how it transforms people to other places in their minds. And the value of music is a whole nother thing we could get, but we don't need to go into the value of music.
A colleague of mine, Tom Schneider, he plays principal in the Richmond Symphony, and I played with other for 9 years or 10 years, and one of the things he turned me on to was the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And it really was a thing for me to sort of be thinking in those terms. So
fix, you said?
Yeah, growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Growth mindset is the belief that, you can improve and, your potential is not some set number. That, you can always, you can become more educated, you can become smarter, you can become a better player, you can become a better fundraiser, whatever.
Wait, we can become smarter? Is that?
Well, maybe not me, but.
Well, I was going to include myself. All right. Enough of the self-deprecation.
Yeah, that's enough of that. All right. So.
But yeah, we can improve.
Right. And the fixed mindset is, it is what it sounds like. It's like the idea that achievement is like potential is an absolutely fixed number that, thou shalt not pass. And, and that mindset creates things like defensiveness, because, a fixed mindset makes you less, open to feedback, whether it's from yourself, whether it's from somebody else, because I guess ultimately you don't believe that you can improve, and I guess maybe you think you don't need to. So when you do get feedback, you don't react so well. So those are the kind of things that, and I know that's a little bit off to the side, but, ultimately it's kind of like if you don't believe something can happen, then it won't. And that's where I think, a good plan, because you can't just say, oh, we're going to make this happen. That doesn't work. But you do have to believe in it enough to make a plan. That's truly believing in something, when you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. Just simply saying, we can do anything if we put our mind to it. It's like, but they never get to the putting their mind to it part. So that's, from an editorial perspective, one of the things that, about the way negotiations went and the way the proposals went, it wasn't just that they wanted these cuts this year. It's that there was no discernible plan in the sense that, okay, well, this is what we want this year in a contract, but, so we're going to make cuts so we can grow. Where's the plan for growth? The
thing that I've always said when people ask me how even when I'm speaking with my family about this job, again, I always frame it, I feel very lucky to be doing it, which I am.
Sure.
But as far as talking about the organization, I said they've only really ever treaded water. They're not going to a goal. They've just kind of damage control. Let's get through whatever we need to get through for this season, and it's progressed that way. And there's been a slight, as we said earlier, been a slight increase here or there, but then a decrease or stagnation. And you could argue with cost of living and inflation, and those numbers will probably be forthcoming.
Sure.
That it's been pay cuts over slow pay cuts over time for a lot of people that have been in this orchestra for decades, right?
Yeah, I believe something like that came out. Again, our Mary Ellen Gorey, our principal second violinist / chair of the negotiating committee, put something on our Facebook labeling that stuff out. And while we're on the subject, just for sort of plugging purposes, we also have on Facebook. There's the musicians of the San Antonio Symphony. So
that's true. I was going to do some plugging, I think, but yeah, we're kind of numerous. This podcast itself will go out on numerous channels too. So depending on how we want to structure it, Facebook. There's links on the MOSAS.org for all these things, right? Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. In fact, we're kind of...
So my kid asked if we're going to be on TikTok.
Yeah, let's get some symphony floss go. No, that was so 5 years ago, right? I'm sure.
And he also asked if we were going to be on video, and I said, yeah. He was like, oh.
I regret him. I don't want to see my dad. Wait, is he going to watch this and just be embarrassed?
I don't know. Cute story about him though. I picked him up from school today, and he told his teacher that my dad's on strike. She's like, oh, he plays in the symphony.
Oh my God.
So and I've talked to some other people that are like, yeah, the word's getting out. People know about what's going on.
That's fantastic.
I was pleasantly surprised to see that. I think that's great.
I'm pleasantly surprised at the reception of it by the press and just the general public. There's no sense of oh, how dare they go. It's more like, oh yeah, these conditions don't seem that great. And we're going to be trying to make that even more clear over time. What the conditions are. If I cut that, the initial part when I was talking about figures, we can go into that in further podcasts, the exact figures, so we can get everything correct. But
okay.
Long story short, again, the figure, big pay cut. Let's just stick with that. It's a big pay cut, and different salaries for
right.
different people.
And these pay cuts put us, certainly in the per service realm, put us, significantly below the poverty line, and the core salaries are teetering on the edge of it, depending on how big your family is. So this is the kind of situation. I would think that this is the kind of situation that people would get behind and say, well, yeah, of course you're not going to work for that.
All right. let's call it. I think successful first. Yeah.
All right. We got to work. We got to work on that.
Yeah. All right. Just wanted to wrap this up and open it up to you. If you have any questions or comments and you want to send them to us, email us at mosaspodcast@gmail.com. MOSAS podcast@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody.